James Miller stared at the eviction notice in his hand, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers. 3 months behind on rent. The landlord's patience had finally run out. He glanced around the small apartment that had been home for the past 5 years, where Sarah had learned to walk, where Emma had celebrated her 10th birthday last month. How would he tell them they had to leave? The sound of his phone vibrating against the kitchen counter broke his trance. His brother's name flashed across the screen. Michael, the golden child who never missed an opportunity to remind James of his failures. James let it ring through to voicemail. He couldn't deal with Michael's success story today, not when his own life was crumbling. Emma's voice called from the bedroom they shared. "Dad, can you help me with my science project?" Her voice still carried that childlike optimism that hadn't yet been tainted by the harsh realities of their situation. "Be right there, sweetheart," he called back, quickly folding the notice and stuffing it into his pocket. The girls didn't need to know. Not yet. He'd figure something out. James had been barely staying afloat since Catherine left 2 years ago. The divorce had been messy, with Catherine moving to Seattle for a job opportunity that promised a better life for her. She sent money when she could, but it was never enough. James juggled 2 jobs, morning shifts at the warehouse and evening shifts at the gas station, but still couldn't keep up with the mounting bills, especially after Emma's hospital stay last winter. His phone buzzed again. A text from Michael this time. "Mom's birthday dinner Saturday. Don't forget again. Dad's expecting everyone." James closed his eyes, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest. Their father, Robert Miller, still lived in the spacious colonial house in Oak Ridge where they'd grown up. The house that Michael visited every Sunday with his picture-perfect family, his wife Diane, their 2 boys dressed in pressed khakis, and their golden retriever. The house James avoided at all costs. The last family dinner had ended in a shouting match when Robert questioned James's ability to provide for his daughters. Catherine was right to leave, his father had said after 1 too many glasses of scotch. You never could keep your life together. Emma appeared in the doorway, her science textbook clutched to her chest. At 11, she was already showing signs of becoming the spitting image of her mother, the same chestnut hair, the same determined set to her jaw. "You okay, Dad?" she asked, her eyes too perceptive for someone so young. "Just tired, Em." He forced a smile. "Let's see that project." Later that night, after both girls were asleep, James sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, scrolling through job listings. His warehouse position was being cut next month, automation replacing human workers. He hadn't told anyone yet. The gas station barely paid minimum wage. Maybe Michael could help. Not that James would ever ask. Their relationship had been strained since childhood, the older brother always overshadowing the younger. His phone lit up with a notification. An email from Catherine. "Can't send money this month. Budget tight. Girls okay." James closed the laptop harder than he intended. The noise echoed in the quiet apartment. 7 words. That's all their family was worth to her now. He reached for the bottle of bourbon he kept hidden behind the cleaning supplies under the sink. Just 1 glass to take the edge off. 1 glass had become a nightly ritual, sometimes stretching to 2 or 3 when the weight of his failures became too heavy to bear sober. The bourbon burned pleasantly as it went down. James thought about his options. He could ask his father for a loan, endure the lecture, the disappointment, the "I told you so" that would inevitably follow. Robert had always favored Michael, the son who had followed in his footsteps, becoming a successful attorney at the same firm. James, the rebellious one who had chosen to pursue music instead of law, had never measured up. His music career had shown promise once. The band had even been signed to a small label. But then Catherine got pregnant with Sarah, and responsibility called. James traded his guitar for a warehouse uniform, his dreams downsized to making sure his daughters had food on the table and a roof over their heads. Now he couldn't even manage that. A soft voice startled him. "Daddy." Sarah stood in the hallway, her teddy bear dragging on the floor beside her. At 6 years old, she still came looking for him when she had nightmares. "Hey, Pumpkin." James quickly set the glass aside. "Bad dream." She nodded, her blonde curls bouncing slightly. "The monster was chasing me again. Come here." He lifted her onto his lap, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "No monsters can get you when I'm around. Promise. Promise." If only he could keep all his promises to her so easily. As Sarah's breathing deepened in sleep against his chest, James made a decision. He would call Michael tomorrow. Not to ask for money. His pride wouldn't allow that. But to say they'd be at the birthday dinner. Perhaps being in the same room with his family would spark some reconciliation. Maybe his father would see how hard he was trying. Maybe Michael would offer to help without being asked. It was a long shot, but James was running out of options. For Emma and Sarah, he'd swallow his pride. For them, he'd face the family he'd been avoiding. For them, he'd find a way out of this mess. He carried Sarah back to bed, tucking her in beside her sister. Tomorrow would be about survival, about keeping this small family together despite the odds stacked against them. Tomorrow, he'd face Michael and his father. Tonight, he allowed himself one more glass of bourbon and the fading memory of what it felt like to have hope. Saturday arrived too quickly. James adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror of his aging Honda. The tie, a Christmas gift from Emma 3 years ago, was the only one he owned, slightly frayed at the edges but clean. Emma and Sarah sat in the back seat, unusually quiet in their best dresses. "Remember what we talked about," James said, meeting their eyes in the mirror. "Best behavior tonight. This is important." "Because of Great-Grandma Rose's birthday?" Sarah asked, smoothing her yellow dress. James nodded, not correcting her misconception. Rose Miller had been dead for 15 years, but his mother's birthday was still celebrated religiously in the Miller household. Robert insisted on it. A formal dinner, toasts with her favorite wine, stories about a woman his daughters had never met. The truth was more complicated. This dinner wasn't about Rose. It was about James finally admitting he needed help. 3 days ago, his landlord had agreed to give him 2 more weeks. 14 days to come up with 3 months back rent or find somewhere else to live. The Miller house looked exactly as James remembered. Imposing colonial architecture, perfectly manicured lawn, window boxes bursting with seasonal flowers. Michael's BMW was already parked in the circular driveway, alongside his father's Mercedes. James parked his Honda on the street. "Wow," breathed Emma, taking in the house. "Uncle Michael lives here?" "No, this is Grandpa's house," James corrected. "Uncle Michael has his own house across town." Equally impressive, James knew, though he'd never visited. The front door opened before they reached it. Michael stood there, casually elegant in a blue button-down and khakis that probably cost more than James's entire wardrobe. "You came," Michael said, surprise evident in his voice. "Dad was betting you'd cancel." "Nice to see you too," James replied, forcing a smile. "Girls, say hello to your Uncle Michael." Emma and Sarah mumbled shy greetings. They'd only met Michael a handful of times, mostly at forced holiday gatherings before James stopped attending altogether. "They've grown," Michael observed, ushering them inside. "How old are you now?" he asked Emma. 11, she answered, straightening her shoulders. "Almost a teenager," Michael smiled. "My boys are outside on the swing set if you want to join them." The girls looked to James for permission. He nodded, and they disappeared through the house toward the backyard, leaving the brothers alone in the foyer. "You look like hell," Michael said, his lawyer's eyes assessing James from head to toe. "Good to see some things never change," James replied. "Your tact remains intact." Michael sighed. "I didn't mean it like that. I'm actually glad you came, James. Dad is too, though he'd never admit it." James doubted that. Robert Miller had made his disappointment in his younger son abundantly clear over the years. The man who built a legal empire from nothing had little patience for what he saw as James's lack of ambition and poor life choices. "Is Diane here?" James asked, changing the subject as they walked through the house. "In the kitchen with Dad. She's handling the catering." Of course there was catering. A personal chef, probably. James thought of the macaroni and cheese he'd made for the girls last night, stretching the last of their groceries. Robert Miller stood at the kitchen island, inspecting a tray of hors d'oeuvres. At 70, he remained formidable, tall, broad-shouldered, with a full head of silver hair and the same piercing blue eyes that Michael had inherited. James had their mother's softer features. "James," Robert acknowledged with a nod. "You're on time." "That's new." "Happy birthday to Mom," James replied, ignoring the jab. Diane, Michael's wife, swooped in for a hug before the tension could build. "James, it's been too long." "The girls are gorgeous. They look just like Catherine." James winced at the mention of his ex-wife, but managed to smile for Diane. She had always been kind to him, even when the rest of the family wrote him off as the black sheep. Dinner was a formal affair, served in the dining room that had hosted countless Miller family gatherings. The girls were on their best behavior, using the right forks, keeping their elbows off the table. James felt a surge of pride watching them, despite the nervous knot in his stomach. Conversation flowed around him. Michael's recent big case, Robert's golf game, Diane's charity work. James remained mostly silent, waiting for the right moment. So, James, Robert finally turned his attention to his younger son. Michael tells me you're still at that warehouse. Any advancement opportunities there? And there it was, the opening James had been dreading. Actually, he began, setting down his fork, I'm looking for something new. Fired again? Robert asked bluntly. Dad, Michael warned. Downsizing, James corrected, keeping his voice even for the girls' sake. Automation. Robert made a non-committal sound. That's the problem with manual labor jobs. No security. James bit back a retort. This wasn't going how he'd planned. James is good with his hands, Diane interjected. Remember that beautiful guitar he made in high school? A hobby, not a career, Robert dismissed. The tension around the table was palpable. Even the children had gone quiet. May I be excused? Emma asked, clearly uncomfortable. Take your sister and cousins to the media room, Diane suggested. There's ice cream in the freezer for dessert. When the children had left, James took a deep breath. I need help, he said simply. The words hung in the air. Michael looked surprised. Robert's expression remained impassive. What kind of help? Michael asked. James explained his situation, the eviction notice, the job loss, the mounting debts. Each admission felt like swallowing glass, but he forced himself to continue. For Emma and Sarah. When he finished, silence stretched across the table. Robert sipped his wine, studying James over the rim of his glass. I warned you this would happen, Robert finally said. When you dropped out of law school to chase that ridiculous band dream. When you married Catherine after knowing her for 6 months. When you refused the position I offered you at the firm. I didn't come here for a lecture, James said, his hands clenched under the table. What did you come for then? Money. Robert's voice was cold. To bail you out so you can make the same mistakes again? Robert, Diane murmured, maybe this isn't. No, I want to hear what James expects from us, Robert continued. He walks away from this family for years, barely lets us see those girls, and now he wants what? A handout. James stood abruptly. This was a mistake. I'm sorry I bothered you. Sit down, Michael said firmly. Dad, that's enough. James is still family. The word family seemed to echo in the room. What did that even mean anymore? James wondered. The Millers had never been close, not since their mother died when James was 10. Robert had buried himself in work, leaving the brothers to essentially raise themselves. Michael had thrived under the pressure to succeed. James had rebelled against it. I can help with the rent, Michael offered. And I know some people who might have job openings. I don't want charity, James said. It's not charity, it's family, Michael insisted. Robert set down his glass with a sharp click. If you're going to help him, Michael, do it right. No handouts. Structure it as a loan with clear terms. And those girls need stability. They should stay here until James gets back on his feet. What? James stared at his father in disbelief. You want me to leave my daughters here? It makes sense, Robert said matter-of-factly. This house has plenty of room. Diane is here most days. The girls would have their cousins, good schools, proper meals. I'm their father, James said through gritted teeth. We stay together. Be reasonable, James, Robert pressed. What kind of father chooses pride over his children's well-being? The accusation hit its mark. James felt the room closing in on him. Maybe we should all take a moment, Diane suggested. But the damage was done. In Robert's eyes, James was a failure as a father, just as he'd been a failure as a son. The worst part was, looking at his life objectively, James couldn't entirely disagree. The drive home from his father's house was silent. Emma and Sarah had picked up on the tension, smart enough not to ask questions. James gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, replaying the dinner conversation in his head. Dad, Emma finally ventured as they pulled into their apartment complex. Are you and Grandpa fighting? James sighed, turning off the engine. It's complicated, Em. Is it because of money? Her eyes were too knowing for an 11-year-old. I heard you talking about rent. James felt a stab of shame. He tried to shield them from his financial struggles, but children always sensed more than adults gave them credit for. Don't worry about that, he said, forcing a smile. Everything's going to be fine. But it wasn't fine. The next morning, James called Michael. "I need to talk to you," he said when his brother answered. Without Dad, they met at a coffee shop halfway between their homes. Michael arrived in his usual polished attire, while James wore the same jeans he'd worn for 3 days straight. "About last night," Michael began. "I'm not letting Dad take my girls." James cut him off. "That's non-negotiable." Michael nodded slowly. "I understand. But James, he was right about one thing. They need stability." "You think I don't know that?" James's voice rose, causing nearby patrons to glance their way. He lowered it again. "Every decision I make is for them." "I know," Michael said, surprising James with his sincerity. "But good intentions don't pay bills." James couldn't argue with that. He stared into his coffee, swallowing his pride. "I'll take the loan. Whatever terms Dad wants." Michael slid a folder across the table. "I already drew up the paperwork. 3-year repayment plan, minimal interest. Dad doesn't know about it." James looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "This is between us," Michael explained. "No strings attached from Dad. Enough to cover your back rent and a security deposit on a better place. There's also a name in there, Kevin Daniels. He runs a custom furniture shop in Millfield. They're looking for someone with woodworking skills." James opened the folder, stunned. "Why would you do this?" Michael was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember Mom's funeral?" The question seemed to come from nowhere. "Of course. I was 16, you were 10. Dad was Dad. Stoic. Unreachable." Michael traced the rim of his coffee cup. "That night, I heard you crying in your room. When I checked on you, you asked me if we were still a family without Mom." James had no memory of this. "I told you we were," Michael continued. "That I'd always look out for you." He gave a humorless laugh. "I haven't done a great job of that, have I?" The admission hung between them, bridging years of distance. "We both made choices," James said finally. "Some better than others," Michael acknowledged. "But we're still brothers." 2 days later, James interviewed with Kevin Daniels. The custom furniture shop was small but thriving, specializing in high-end pieces for wealthy clients. Kevin, a burly man with calloused hands and a no-nonsense attitude, looked skeptical when James walked in. "Michael Miller sent you?" he asked, frowning at James's resume. "Says here you worked warehouse jobs for the last decade. What do you know about fine woodworking?" Instead of answering, James pulled out his phone and showed Kevin photos of pieces he'd made in his spare time. A rocking chair for Sarah when she was born, bookshelves for Emma's room, a coffee table currently sitting in their apartment. Kevin's expression changed. "You made these?" "Nights and weekends," James confirmed. "Never had the chance to do it professionally." Kevin hired him on the spot, part-time to start, with potential for full-time if he proved himself. The pay wasn't great, but combined with his remaining gas station shifts, it would be enough to keep them afloat while he learned the trade. That night, James sat the girls down at their kitchen table. "We need to talk about some changes," he began carefully. "Good changes," he added when he saw their worried expressions. He explained about the new job, about the loan from Uncle Michael that would help them catch up on rent and maybe move to a slightly better apartment in a few months. He didn't mention how close they'd come to homelessness, or their grandfather's offer to take them in. "So we're okay?" Sarah asked, her small face serious. "We're getting there," James promised. Later, after the girls were in bed, James called Catherine. They hadn't spoken directly in months, communicating only through brief texts about the girls. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding surprised. "James, is everything all right?" "Are the girls?" "They're fine," he assured her. "I just wanted to update you on some things." He told her about the job change, the loan from Michael, his plans for the future. He didn't mention the eviction notice or how close he'd come to losing everything. "That's really good, James." The genuine relief in her voice caught him off guard. "I've been worried." "You have?" A pause. "Of course I have. Just because we couldn't make it work doesn't mean I stopped caring." The admission stung in an unexpected way. "You could have shown it," he said, more bitterly than he intended. "Your last few support checks bounced." Another pause, longer this time. "I lost my job 3 months ago. I didn't want to tell you because, well, it felt like one more failure." James sat back, processing this. Catherine struggling? The image didn't align with the narrative he'd constructed, that she'd abandoned them for a better life, that she was thriving while he barely survived. "The Seattle dream didn't work out?" he asked, without the satisfaction he might have expected to feel. "Not exactly," she admitted. "I'm waiting tables again. Sharing an apartment with 2 other women. It's humbling." James thought about what to say. Part of him wanted to lash out, to ask how it felt to be on the other side of financial insecurity. But what would that accomplish? "The girls miss you," he said instead. "I miss them too. Every day." Her voice cracked slightly. "I've been saving for a plane ticket. Maybe this summer. They'd like that." James surprised himself with how much he meant it. After they hung up, James sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, thinking about family. The one he was born into, the one he had created, the one that had fractured. He thought about his father's rigid expectations and Michael's unexpected support. He thought about Catherine's struggles, so similar to his own despite the distance between them. The next morning, James arrived early for his first day at the furniture shop. Kevin showed him around, explaining the current projects, introducing him to the other craftsmen. For the first time in years, James felt a spark of genuine excitement. This wasn't just another job to pay the bills. This was something he could be good at, something he could be proud of. During his lunch break, he called Michael. "I started the new job today," he said when his brother answered. "Already? That's great. How is it?" "It feels right," James admitted. "Thank you. Not just for the loan, but for remembering." Michael was quiet for a moment. "We should have dinner sometime. Just us. Talk about things." "I'd like that," James said, and meant it. That evening, he helped Emma with her homework while Sarah drew pictures at the kitchen table. The apartment was still small, the furniture still worn, the future still uncertain. But something had shifted. The weight on James's chest had lightened slightly. When Sarah presented him with her drawing, stick figures labeled Daddy, Emma, and Sarah standing in front of a house, James felt a lump form in his throat. "Is that our house?" he asked. Sarah nodded solemnly. "Uncle Michael said we might move. Can we get a house with a yard? And maybe a dog?" James looked at Emma, who was pretending not to listen while solving math problems. "Not right away," he said honestly. "But someday. We're going to be okay." Emma glanced up from her homework. "I know we are, Dad." The simple confidence in her voice nearly undid him. After everything they'd been through, his daughters still believed in him. Maybe it was time he started believing in himself too. Later, after the girls were asleep, James took out the loan papers Michael had given him. He read through the terms carefully, then signed his name. It wasn't a solution to everything, but it was a start, a bridge to whatever came next. He put the signed documents in an envelope to mail tomorrow, then did something he hadn't done in months. He took out his old acoustic guitar from the closet, dusted it off, and quietly began to play. The melody was rusty at first, his fingers stiff from disuse, but gradually the music came back to him, not as a reminder of dreams abandoned, but as a simple pleasure rediscovered. In the small living room of the apartment they might soon have to leave, surrounded by the sleeping presence of his daughters, James Miller played softly to himself and aloud, for the first time in a long while, the possibility of hope. 3 months into his new job at the furniture shop, James's hands were covered in small cuts and calluses. Kevin had started him on basic tasks, sanding, finishing, simple joinery, but had recently allowed him to work on custom pieces under supervision. The work was physically demanding but deeply satisfying in a way his warehouse job never had been. Each completed project gave him a sense of accomplishment that had been missing from his life for years. The loan from Michael had given them breathing room. They were caught up on rent, the electricity was no longer in danger of being shut off, and James had even started setting aside a small amount each week toward a security deposit on a better apartment. It wasn't much, but it was progress. On a crisp Friday afternoon, Kevin called James into his office at the back of the shop. The small room was cluttered with design sketches, with samples, and decades-old furniture magazines. "Got a special order," Kevin said without preamble, sliding a design sketch across his desk. "Client wants a custom dining table. Cherry wood, inlaid maple. Complex job." James studied the design. It was ambitious, a large farmhouse-style table with intricate detailing and custom joinery, far beyond the simple pieces he'd been working on. "It's beautiful," he admitted. "Who's taking the lead on it?" Kevin leaned back in his chair. "You are." James looked up in surprise. "Me?" "Kevin, I've only been here 3 months. This is at least a $4,000 piece." $5,000, actually, Kevin corrected. "And yes, I've seen your work, your attention to detail. I think you're ready. Tom will assist when needed, but the design execution is yours." Pride swelled in James's chest, quickly followed by doubt. What if I mess it up? That's expensive wood, and you won't mess it up, Kevin interrupted. And if you do, we fix it. That's how you learn. He stood up, signaling the end of the discussion. Materials arrive Monday. Get your design plan to me by then. That evening, James spread the sketch on the kitchen table after dinner, working on measurements and cut lists. Emma peered over his shoulder. What's that? She asked. A dining table I'm building at work, James explained, pointing out features in the design. Emma studied it thoughtfully. Like Grandpa's table? The big one we ate on at the birthday dinner? Similar style, but this one will be unique, James said. One of a kind. Can we have a table like that someday? Sarah chimed in from where she was coloring on the floor. James smiled at her. Maybe, if we get a bigger place. Are we still moving? Emma asked, sitting down across from him. You haven't mentioned it lately. James set down his pencil. At 11, almost 12 now, Emma was perceptive beyond her years. She'd been the one to help Sarah adjust after Catherine left, the one who took on responsibilities no child should have to bear. We're working on it, he said honestly. Things are getting better, but we need to save a bit more first. Emma nodded, accepting this as she did most adult explanations. Uncle Michael called today while you were in the shower. He wants to know if we can come for dinner next weekend. He said to tell you Grandpa won't be there. James hadn't spoken to his father since the disastrous birthday dinner, though he and Michael had met for lunch twice. The brothers were cautiously rebuilding their relationship, finding common ground beyond their shared childhood. Would you like to go? James asked. Emma shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. Their house has a pool. James laughed. I'll call him back. The following weekend, they visited Michael and Diane's home in Lakewood Estates, an upscale neighborhood on the other side of town. The house was exactly as James had imagined, modern, spacious, professionally decorated, with the promised swimming pool in the backyard. While the children swam under Diane's supervision, Michael gave James a tour that ended in his home office. Diane's been wanting to redecorate this room, Michael commented, gesturing to the generic executive-style desk and bookcases that filled the space. Maybe you could build something custom? James ran his hand along the existing desk. This is expensive furniture. It's boring furniture, Michael corrected. No character. Kevin tells me you're quite talented. James raised an eyebrow. You've been checking up on me? Invested interest, Michael replied with a slight smile. How's the loan working out? It's helping, James admitted. I've been able to focus on learning the trade instead of just scraping by. Michael nodded, seemingly satisfied. He opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Catherine called me last week. James stiffened. What? Why would she call you? To check on the girls, Michael said. She was worried you wouldn't tell her if things were bad. The familiar anger toward Catherine bubbled up. So she called my brother instead of calling me directly? Classic Catherine, avoiding difficult conversations. She said she's tried calling you several times, Michael countered. Said you don't always pick up. James couldn't deny it. There had been calls he'd let go to voicemail, texts he'd responded to with minimal information. It was easier that way, less painful. She's coming to town next month, Michael continued, handing James the envelope. She asked me to give you this. Inside was a check, not large, but substantial, and a note, for the girls. I'm sorry for everything. See you soon. James stared at it, emotions churning. I don't need her money now. It's not about need, Michael said quietly. It's about her trying to do right by her daughters. Something I think you understand. James couldn't argue with that. He tucked the envelope into his pocket without further comment. That night, after they returned home and the girls were in bed, James called Catherine. She answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting for his call. The girls would love to see you, he said after an awkward exchange of pleasantries. Emma's science fair is the second weekend you're here. She's building a model of the solar system. I wouldn't miss it, Catherine promised. There was a pause. How are you, James? Really? The question caught him off guard. Their conversations since the separation had focused exclusively on logistics regarding the girls. I'm better, he said finally. Working at a furniture shop. Building things again. Like you always wanted, Catherine said softly. I'm glad. The simple acknowledgement of his dream, something she'd once dismissed as impractical, left James momentarily speechless. We should talk about arrangements for when you're here, he said, changing the subject. You're welcome to take the girls for the weekend if you want. Actually, Catherine hesitated. I was hoping we could all spend some time together. The four of us. If that wouldn't be too weird. It would be weird, James thought. Very weird. But also, perhaps, important for Emma and Sarah. We could make that work, he agreed cautiously. After hanging up, James sat in the quiet apartment, thinking about the changes of the past few months. His relationship with Michael, healing after years of distance. His new career, finally aligning with his passion. And now Catherine, returning not as an adversary, but as a co-parent trying to make amends. The next morning at the shop, James arrived early to work on the custom table. The cherry wood had been delivered, rich, reddish planks with beautiful grain patterns. As he began the careful process of selecting which pieces would form the tabletop, Kevin walked in. "You're here early," he observed, setting down his coffee. "Wanted to get started?" James replied, not looking up from his work. Kevin watched him for a moment. "You know why I gave you this project?" James paused. "You said you liked my attention to detail." "That's part of it," Kevin acknowledged. "But mostly, I recognize the look of a man who needs to build something lasting. I had that same look 20 years ago after my divorce." James met his gaze, surprised by the personal disclosure. "This job saved me," Kevin continued simply. "Gave me purpose when I needed it most. Thought it might do the same for you." Before James could respond, the shop door opened as the other workers arrived. Kevin gave him a nod and walked away, leaving James to contemplate his words as he returned to the cherry wood beneath his hands, raw material waiting to be transformed into something beautiful and enduring. James spotted Catherine immediately at the airport gate. Her chestnut hair was shorter now, cut in a sleek bob that framed her face, but her nervous habit of tucking it behind her ear remained unchanged. She wore a simple blue dress, the color he'd always said brought out her eyes, and scanned the waiting crowd anxiously. The girls had insisted on coming to meet her. Sarah bounced on her toes with excitement, while Emma maintained the cool demeanor of a preteen, trying not to appear too eager. James had spent the previous night preparing them for the visit, reminding them that their mother's stay was temporary, trying to manage expectations. "There she is," Sarah shouted, breaking free from James's hand and running toward Catherine. Catherine's face lit up as she knelt to catch Sarah in a fierce hug. Emma followed more slowly, but her reserve crumbled when Catherine opened an arm to include her in the embrace. James hung back, giving them space for their reunion. When Catherine finally looked up, her eyes were wet. "Thank you for bringing them," she said over the girls' heads. James nodded, unsure what to say. The Catherine before him didn't match the villain he'd constructed in his mind during their bitter separation, the woman who had abandoned her family for career ambitions. This Catherine looked tired, a bit thinner, with fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. "We made a welcome sign, but forgot it at home," Sarah was explaining breathlessly. "And Dad helped us clean the whole apartment. We got new sheets for your bed. Well, it's actually Dad's bed, but he's going to sleep on the couch." Catherine glanced at James in surprise. "I booked a hotel room. I didn't want to impose." "Cancel it," James heard himself say. "We have the space. It makes more sense for the girls." The drive home was filled with Sarah's nonstop chatter, updating Catherine on everything she'd missed: school projects, neighborhood friends, the stray cat they sometimes fed outside their building. Emma contributed occasionally, warming up gradually. James remained focused on the road, trying to ignore the familiar scent of Catherine's perfume now filling his car. The apartment looked better than it had in months. James had spent the week deep cleaning, fixing small issues he'd been ignoring, even buying a few new towels and a plant for the living room. It was still modest, a far cry from the home they'd shared when married, but it was clean and comfortable. "You've made it nice," Catherine commented as she set her suitcase down. "Dad built the bookshelf," Emma pointed out, indicating the oak shelving unit along one wall. "And he fixed the wobbly kitchen table." Catherine ran her hand along the bookshelf. "It's beautiful work. Just a weekend project," James said, uncomfortable with the praise. The first evening was awkward but civil. They ordered pizza, Sarah's request, and Catherine presented gifts she'd brought. Books for Emma, a stuffed penguin for Sarah, and, unexpectedly, a bottle of the bourbon James had always preferred. "I wasn't sure if you still..." Catherine gestured vaguely as she handed him the bottle after the girls had gone to bed. "Thanks," James said, setting it aside. "I've cut back, actually. With the new job, I need to be sharp in the mornings." Catherine nodded, settling on the opposite end of the couch. "Michael says you're doing really well there." "Michael talks too much," James replied, but there was no bite to it. He cares about you, Catherine said. He always did, even when you two weren't speaking. James didn't respond directly to this. You've been in touch with him all this time. Occasionally, she admitted. Mostly about the girls. I wanted updates when things were difficult between us. James processed this information, his brother and ex-wife in communication behind his back. A year ago, it would have infuriated him. Now, it merely stung. You could have just asked me directly, he said. Would you have been honest? Catherine challenged gently. Would you have told me if you were struggling? They both knew the answer. James's pride had always been his weakness. I should check on the girls, he said, standing abruptly. The next few days established an uneasy routine. Catherine took the girls shopping, to the movies, to the park. James gave them space, working longer hours at the shop, focusing on the cherrywood table that was taking shape under his hands. On Wednesday evening, James came home to find Catherine alone in the kitchen, cooking. The girls are at Michael and Diane's for dinner, she explained, stirring something that smelled like the pasta sauce she used to make. Diane invited them so we could talk. About what? James asked, wary. About everything. Catherine turned to face him. About the past 2 years. About what happens next. James wanted to walk out, to avoid this conversation as he'd been avoiding it for days. But running away had never solved anything. Let me change first, he said. Dinner was surprisingly good. Catherine had always been a better cook than him. They ate in relative silence until Catherine finally set down her fork. I made a mistake, she said quietly, leaving the way I did. James looked up, startled by the direct acknowledgement. Not leaving, she clarified. We weren't good together at the end, James. We both know that. But the way I did it, taking that job in Seattle without really discussing it, threatening to fight for custody if you didn't agree. I was wrong. James had imagined this moment, Catherine admitting her mistakes, countless times. In his imagination, he'd felt vindicated, triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow. Why are you telling me this now, he asked. Because I'm moving back, she replied. Not here exactly. There's a position at Regional Hospital. It's not as prestigious as Seattle, but it's stable. I'd be 20 minutes away instead of a plane ride. James set down his glass carefully. And you're telling me because it affects the girls. And you. Catherine hesitated. I want to be part of their lives again, James. Really part of it. School events, doctor appointments, everyday stuff. Not just holiday visits and video calls. The implications hung between them. Custody arrangements would need to be formalized. Financial support reconsidered. Boundaries established. What about your boyfriend? James asked. The existence of someone new in Seattle had been confirmed through Emma's casual mentions. That's over, Catherine said simply. It wasn't serious. James nodded, absorbing this information without comment. I don't expect things to go back to how they were before, Catherine continued when he didn't speak. I know too much has happened, but I want us to find a way to be in the girls' lives together without all the anger. James thought about the past months, the financial struggles, the late nights worrying about eviction, the moments when he'd felt utterly alone in parenting. He thought about the girls' faces when they saw Catherine at the airport. They've missed you, he said finally. It would be good for them to have you nearby. Relief washed over Catherine's face. Thank you. I haven't been perfect either, James admitted, the words difficult to say. After you left, I was so angry I probably made it harder for you to stay connected with them. That wasn't fair to the girls. The acknowledgement of his own role in their broken communication hung in the air between them. We were both doing our best, Catherine offered, even when our best wasn't very good. Later, after Catherine had gone to pick up the girls from Michael's, James called his brother. Did you know? He asked when Michael answered. About Catherine moving back? She mentioned she was considering it, Michael admitted. I thought it would be better coming from her. James sighed. No more secrets, Michael. If we're rebuilding this relationship, I need honesty. Fair enough, Michael agreed. Speaking of honesty, Dad's been asking about you. James tensed. What about me? He saw the display cabinet you built for Henderson's department store. Apparently, he shops there. James had forgotten that his father frequented the high-end store where one of his early pieces had been placed on display with Kevin's encouragement. And James prompted. And he was impressed, Michael said. Though of course he didn't say it in those exact words. It was more like, the boy finally found something he's good at. Coming from Robert Miller, this was practically effusive praise. He's having surgery next month, Michael continued. Minor procedure, but at his age, he's been updating his will, getting things in order. Is he expecting me to care? James asked, the old bitterness rising. I think he's expecting you to be family, Michael replied evenly. Despite everything. Family. The word seemed to take on new meaning lately. His relationship with Michael, healing after years of estrangement. Catherine, returning to co-parent their daughters. Even his father, in his own stubborn way, reaching out through Michael. I'll think about it, James said finally. That night, after everyone was asleep, James sat at the kitchen table with his sketchbook, working on a design that had been forming in his mind for weeks. A smaller version of the cherry dining table he was building at work, sized perfectly for their apartment. It would be cramped, but with fold-down leaves, it could work. A table where the four of them could sit together, even if only occasionally. A place to start rebuilding whatever came next. The hospital waiting room was eerily quiet. James sat stiffly in an uncomfortable chair, leafing through an outdated magazine without absorbing any of the content. Michael paced nearby, checking his watch every few minutes. They had been waiting for nearly 2 hours. He'll be fine, Michael said, more to himself than to James. It's a routine procedure. James nodded absently. He hadn't planned to be here. When Robert went in for his heart valve surgery, James had intended to send a generic get-well card through Michael, the minimum social obligation. But something had changed when he'd gotten Michael's call that morning. Dad's going into surgery, Michael had said, his voice tight with an emotion James rarely heard from his composed older brother. I know things are complicated, but if something goes wrong. James had found himself driving to the hospital without fully processing the decision. Not for Robert's sake, but for Michael's. For the tentative reconciliation they'd been building. A doctor in blue scrubs approached them, her expression unreadable. Both brothers tensed. Family of Robert Miller, she asked. Yes, Michael responded immediately. His sons. How is he? The surgery went well, she assured them. We replaced the valve successfully. He's in recovery now. The relief was palpable. Michael's shoulders sagged slightly, and James realized he'd been holding his breath. When can we see him? Michael asked. He'll be groggy for a while, the doctor explained. One visitor at a time, just for a few minutes each. He needs rest. Michael glanced at James. You should go first. James shook his head. You go? I'll wait. After Michael disappeared down the corridor, James stepped outside to call Catherine. She had taken the girls for the weekend to look at apartments, part of her relocation plan. How's your father? She asked when he explained where he was. Apparently fine. Surgery went well. That's good, Catherine said, genuine relief in her voice. She had always gotten along reasonably well with Robert, who had approved of her ambition and intelligence if not her choice in husbands. The girls will be happy to hear it. James could hear Sarah chattering in the background. How's the apartment hunting going? I think I found a place, Catherine said. 3-bedroom in Westridge. Good school district. About 15 minutes from you. The implications were clear, room for the girls to stay with her regularly. James had been preparing himself for this reality, but it still stung. For 2 years, despite the struggles, he'd been the constant in their lives. Sounds nice, he managed. There's a park across the street, Catherine continued. And I made sure to find something with a second bathroom. Emma's going to be a teenager soon. Sharing isn't going to work much longer. James thought of their current cramped apartment with its single bathroom, something he hadn't been able to afford to upgrade. Catherine wasn't intentionally highlighting the difference in their financial situations, but it hurt nonetheless. They'll like that, he said neutrally. A nurse approached, catching his attention. Mr. Miller? Your father's asking for you. James was surprised. I'll be right in, he told the nurse, then spoke into the phone. I have to go. Dad's awake. Good luck, Catherine said softly before hanging up. The hospital room was dimly lit, machines beeping softly beside the bed. Robert looked smaller somehow, his imposing presence diminished by the hospital gown and 4 lines. His silver hair was disheveled, his face pale. He turned his head slightly as James entered. You came, Robert observed, his voice raspy. James approached the bed awkwardly. Michael called. Said the surgery went well. Robert made a dismissive gesture. Minor procedure. Everyone's overreacting. Even hospitalized, Robert Miller couldn't admit vulnerability. Some things never changed. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them until Robert spoke again. Saw your work. At Henderson's. James nodded, unsure how to respond. Quality craftsmanship, Robert continued. Wouldn't have expected it. From anyone else, the comment might have seemed like a backhanded compliment. From Robert, it was practically effusive praise. Thanks, James said simply. Robert's eyes drifted to the window. Your mother would have liked it. She always said you had artist hands. Like her father. The mention of his mother caught James off guard. Robert rarely spoke of Rose, despite his insistence on commemorating her birthday each year. I don't really remember him, James admitted. His maternal grandfather had died when he was very young. Master carpenter, Robert said. Built half the cabinets in this town. Hated me. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Thought I wasn't good enough for his daughter. James had never heard this story before. The personal disclosure from his usually reserved father was disconcerting. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Robert's gaze returned to James, suddenly sharp despite the medication. Because I made mistakes. With you. With Michael too, but differently. James stood frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. Pushed you too hard, Robert continued. Or not in the right direction. Should have seen it sooner. The admission, as close to an apology as Robert Miller was likely capable of, hung in the air between them. You're doing well now, Robert said before James could respond. Building things. Supporting your girls. I'm trying, James said, finding his voice. Robert nodded once, decisively. That's all any of us can do. His eyes began to drift closed. Tell Michael to stop pacing outside. Makes the nurses nervous. James recognized the dismissal. Whatever moment of vulnerability the surgery and medication had created was passing. But something had shifted, a small crack in the wall between them. I'll tell him, James agreed, turning to leave. And James, Robert called, his voice already heavy with encroaching sleep. Bring the girls by the house sometime. When I'm home. Been too long. In the corridor, Michael looked up expectantly. How was he? Stubborn. Difficult. Surprisingly talkative, James summarized. So, himself, basically. Michael laughed softly. That's encouraging. 3 weeks later, the cherrywood table was complete. James stood back as Kevin circled it, inspecting every joint, every curve, every inch of the hand-rubbed finish. Excellent work, Kevin declared finally. Client's picking it up tomorrow. You should be here. James nodded, pride welling in his chest. The table represented more than just craftsmanship. It was tangible proof that he could create something of value, something that would last. That evening, he brought home the folding table he'd been working on in his spare time, smaller than the custom piece, but crafted with the same care. Emma and Sarah helped him carry it up to the apartment and set it up in their small dining area. It's beautiful, Dad, Emma said, running her hand along the smooth surface. Better than our wobbly old one, Sarah agreed. James beamed at their approval. Perfect timing, too. Your mom's coming for dinner tomorrow. The custody arrangement was gradually taking shape. Catherine had signed a lease on the Westridge apartment and would move in next month. The girls would split their time. Weekdays with James to maintain school consistency, weekends with Catherine, with flexibility for special events. Not ideal for anyone, perhaps, but workable. The following evening, Catherine arrived precisely on time, bearing a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine. The girls had helped prepare dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and salad, but made with care. The table is gorgeous, Catherine exclaimed when she saw it. You made this? James nodded. Just finished it yesterday. He made a giant one for a rich customer too, Sarah informed her proudly. It cost $5,000. Catherine raised her eyebrows, impressed. Sounds like business is good. It's getting there, James acknowledged. Kevin's talking about making me a partner eventually, if things continue this way. During dinner, James found himself studying Catherine across the new table. She was animated, asking the girls about school, sharing stories about the hospital where she'd be working. The bitterness he'd harbored for so long had faded to a dull ache, replaced by something closer to acceptance. After the girls went to bed, Catherine helped him clear the dishes. Thank you, she said as they worked side by side at the sink. For letting me back into their lives so easily. You could have made it difficult. It wouldn't have helped anyone, James replied. Especially not them. Catherine nodded. I meant what I said before. I want us to find a way to do this together. Co-parenting, I mean. We're figuring it out, James said. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was progress. As Catherine prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Michael mentioned your father invited you all to Sunday dinner next week. He did, James confirmed. Another tentative step in rebuilding fractured relationships. That's good, Catherine said softly. Family is important, even the complicated ones. After she left, James sat alone at his new table, running his fingers along the grain of the wood. 6 months ago, his life had been unraveling. Finances in shambles, relationships broken, future uncertain. Now, gradually, he was rebuilding. Not just furniture, but connections, trust, stability. The next morning, James received an unexpected call from Kevin. Client loves the table, Kevin reported. Wants to commission 2 more pieces, sideboard and china cabinet to match. That's great, James said. There's more, Kevin continued. Got a call from Henderson's. Someone saw our work there and wants to feature it in a home design magazine. They're doing a spread on local artisans. James nearly dropped the phone. Seriously? Dead serious. Could mean a lot more business coming our way. Kevin paused. Remember what I told you about this job saving me? Same thing could happen for you. Not just a job anymore, a career, a future. After hanging up, James stood in his kitchen, possibilities expanding before him. More commissions meant more income. Perhaps enough to finally move to a better apartment. Maybe eventually a small house with a yard, like Sarah wanted. A proper workshop where he could build furniture on weekends. His phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Dad home from hospital. Cranky as ever. Still expecting you Sunday. James smiled slightly. Some things would never change completely. His father would always be difficult. His relationship with Michael would always carry the shadows of their complicated childhood. Co-parenting with Catherine would never be simple. But other things could change. Were changing. The small table he'd built stood in the center of his kitchen. Solid, well-crafted, built to last. Like the life he was slowly, carefully constructing for himself and his daughters. James texted back, "We'll be there."